Point here that we're seeing in Turkey has such a big impact, especially at a point where we are certainly engaged to launch a major offensive to retake Mosul and to support the Iraqis in doing that. And this may well really disrupt that, or at least stall it out in the short term.
Or maybe by tomorrow it'll be over, and it's going to be, this will be sort of a, just a flashpoint. But we're all watching this very carefully. Anyway, Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
So what does this military coup in Turkey mean for us and for our war against ISIS in neighboring Syria and Iraq? Erin Vanko is a journalist who is constantly back and forth from Turkey. She joins us tonight from New York. Erin, you're not home tonight in Turkey, so what do you think looking across the world at what's going on?
Yeah, like a couple of other people have said on the show before, this has been a big build-up. I'm not surprised at all, but I'm watching it. I'm wondering how long this is going to last. I'm seeing reports now on social media and I believe on Reuters saying that the leader of the coup has surrendered himself to security forces. I'm not sure. What we're really concerned about is how widespread is this sentiment within the military. I'm hearing that this has been launched by really low-level soldiers, and a lot of other parts of the military aren't necessarily on board. So I have a feeling this might fizzle out within a few days, but I'm not sure. Again, I think we all have to watch it really closely.
Is there a spark? Is there something that set this off today?
No, I think it was just perfect timing. It was like a perfect storm. Erdogan is not in the country. He's been said to be on vacation or with his family somewhere. He didn't go into hiding. He had previously been out of the country. And I think, this had been building up for the past 7 or 8, even 9 months in terms of protesting in the streets and infighting between politicians and the government. And I think it was just the perfect storm, essentially.
Do me a favor, compare and contrast living there. I mean, when I read things about how the journalists are locked up, and I read that Erdogan wants greater power and authority and is trying to chip away at their government so they can get more power. I don't have a sense of what it's like to live there and live here. So tell me.
Yeah, it's really interesting. All of the Middle East correspondents were once reporting in Cairo, and then that toppled, and no one could report there. And then we all moved to Istanbul, and some in Beirut, and now Istanbul is becoming a hub of journalism crackdown and the military and government entering TV stations and shutting it down. A lot of journalists can't even get visas anymore. If you're not a print publication, you cannot get a journalist visa. If you work for any of the digital publications, it's really difficult to report there, and you have to essentially report undercover, which means you can't really report on anything that goes against the government. So it's extremely difficult to be reporting from Istanbul.
If Erdogan retains power, what happens? And if he doesn't, the military takes over, what happens, in your prediction?
If the military takes over, the war against ISIS in Iraq is going to just fall apart, is my opinion. We have to remember that Turkey is set geographically in a very interesting position, especially because it's a transit hub for energy. So it really affects countries from Russia all the way to the U.S. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of issues in terms of ISIS taking more ground in Iraqi Kurdistan in the north, and that's going to affect the oil flow from that part of Iraq and then, out to the western part of the world. So I think that the oil industry is going to see a big disruption this week.
That's if the military takes control?
That's if the military takes control.
Why is that? Explain to me why that would be. I mean, I've been in northern Iraq where there's, where the Kurdish population in northern Iraq is fighting with Baghdad over oil. But explain why this would, why if the military takes over Turkey, that it disrupts the energy coming out of Iraq and into other parts of Western Europe.
Yeah, well, essentially, there's not really much oversight in the oil industry in Iraqi Kurdistan to begin with, and there's a big black market that sort of runs into southeastern Turkey. And so basically we'd be lacking any sort of what is government regulation in that part of southeastern Turkey and northern Iraq. That would sort of just break down. And of course, any sort of uneasiness in the oil industry is going to make prices go up and down. So I think just sort of the anxiety over this attempted coup is going to reverberate in that part of the world.
How about ISIS? I mean, tell me how this is going to impact the U.S. war on ISIS. Either way, whether Erdogan takes power or the military.
I think that the U.S. has to make some really tough decisions going forward. Turkey was a major part of the war against ISIS in Syria and in Iraq just because of its geographic location. We had to sort of coordinate military campaigns with them to go in and out of their airspace. now we're left with the question, well, who do we talk to even to fly over there, to fly into the country and make sure that, we can go into their airspace and launch attacks from the air going into Iraq. So I think that they have to make some tough decisions about what statement the U.S. is going to come out and say, we're going to support Erdogan or we're going to support the coup. And if they go ahead with supporting the coup, then they have to pick, okay, who are we going to negotiate with in the Turkish government, and how are we going to logistically continue up our effort to fight ISIS in Iraq and Syria, which has been going pretty well over the past few weeks or even month. And so I think we'll probably see a dip in the number of airstrikes that are being launched in Iraq and Syria. Unfortunately, I think that the fight in Syria is going to fall off the map a little bit, even though that there's a big siege going on in the north right now. I think the major concern is going to be ISIS in Iraq.
Aaron, thank you. Thanks. And former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton, joins us. Good evening, Ambassador. And as you look at these pictures and see what's going on in Turkey, your thoughts?
Well, I think we really don't have any good idea what the disposition of the Turkish military is. We know the coup originated with some in the military. The senior officers, many who have been put in place in the past several years by Erdogan, obviously are part of the problem from the perspective of those carrying out the coup. So there's no doubt this is not run from the very top of the military, but it's a kind of last-ditch effort by those who still adhere to the vision of Mustafa Kemal to have a secular constitution, a secular society. And it's perhaps unique in Western governments that the Constitution itself gives the military the duty of maintaining the secular nature of the state, which Erdogan has been doing everything he can to overturn. So I think it remains very much up in the air. I don't think these television pictures tell us very much. You're hearing competing press statements, but I think the future of Turkey is obviously at stake here. If the coup succeeds, then I think Erdogan's effort perhaps to recreate the Ottoman Caliphate, perhaps to be the dominant power again in the Middle East, and to move Turkey in an Islamic direction will be foiled. If Erdogan prevails, I think you would see an acceleration of the Islamicization efforts he's been making.
Well, it puts the United States in an awkward position. We support elected governments, we don't support coups. Yet the way that you describe it is that if given the choice, it seems that the United States would prefer that it move towards less towards an Islamic government and towards a more secular one.
Well, I think the president's statement just a few minutes ago seems to indicate he's backing Erdogan the same way for a good long time they backed Mohamed Morsi in Egypt. I think it's not a question of elected governments versus military governments, at least in the case of Turkey. It's a question of the Constitution, which Erdogan has been doing his best to subvert. It's not only that he's been trying to get his supporters, Islamicists, in the top jobs in the military, he's been systematically packing the judiciary to that effect as well. So that's why I think this really is kind of a last stand by the secularists who are still in the army, and that may bode poorly for their chances of success. But on the other hand, as I say, at least on a public level, I don't think we have now any estimate of how much of the military backs the coup and how much of the military and the police oppose the coup.
Should we be worried? Does this impact us here in the United States? I mean, as Americans are watching this across the country and looking at these pictures and trying to figure out, who's doing what, how does it impact Americans?
Well, if Turkey goes in the direction that Erdogan wants, toward a more Islamicist state, I think that increasing radicalization just contributes to the growing chaos across the region. If the military wins, it's still going to be difficult. But, Erdogan once said when he was mayor of Istanbul, and I think this is in the minds of a lot of Turkish citizens, civilians and military, Erdogan once said, democracy is like a streetcar. You ride it to the stop you want, and then you get off. So it may sound ironic, but the defender not only of the secular state, but the possibility of democracy into the future here could well be the military against this kind of authoritarian internal coup by somebody like Erdogan.
But Erdogan is someone we know, is someone we have worked with for a while.
Well,
we need that base.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. He was head of the AKP party back in 2003 when the United States sought permission from the government of Turkey to bring in the 4th Infantry Division across the Turkish border into Iraq. And we couldn't get the votes. And Erdogan said, oh, well, you know, I did my best, and so on and so forth. I have always believed he sabotaged our efforts back then. So I have no charity in my heart for Erdogan. If he goes down, I'm not shedding any tears. I don't think he's been a friend of the United States.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if he's been. I didn't mean to say he was a friend, but he's someone we know who we've worked with. I mean, we at least know him that way. I mean, it's someone we have, whether he's been cooperative or not. At least it's a known entity. If the military is successful in this coup, who does emerge as the one in charge, and what's the certainty there for us?
Well, I don't think we know, but we know Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping well too. That doesn't. I mean, that to me is not evidence in support of their remaining in power necessarily. I think there could be confusion if the military prevails. It likely is people at the lower general grade level who are doing this because they're the last ones that haven't been purged. And so therefore the question of the loyalty of all of the various military units around the country remains to be determined. And at this point, the journalists are mostly sitting in Istanbul and Ankara, and I don't think have any real way of knowing what the sentiment of the troops is throughout the country.
What do you think German Chancellor Angela Merkel is thinking tonight as she looks at this?
Well, look, she's made a mess of this whole refugee situation in Europe. I have a lot of respect for Merkel, but this has been a debacle. And I think the Erdogan government facilitated the movement of those hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of refugees out of Syria and elsewhere in the Middle East. If anything, I think that the restoration of a secular government here is more likely to stem the refugee flow. I think the military is more likely to say we've got to get control of this situation.
And it's being reported right now that at least being reported in Turkey, that the coup attempt has been repelled. So that sounds like it might be. I mean, that Erdogan has regained control.
Well, it's certainly possible. As I say, at this point, we've got a lot of competing press releases, and we'll see what happens as the evening goes on. Just very difficult to tell from a distance.
There also were some flashes and explosions, but I don't know what that was. We saw a picture that I can't, I don't know what they are. I just noticed them in the background as we look at these pictures. What about, in terms of, I asked you about German Chancellor Angela Merkel, impact on Western Europe is what? And I mean, as we watch and try to figure out even what's going on, whether Erdogan has taken complete power back or not. But give me your thoughts on the impact on Western Europe.
Well, I think Turkey was never likely to succeed in its application for membership in the EU. This will probably seal its fate for those who would use the coup as an excuse. But honestly, if Erdogan has succeeded here, as that report indicates, I think you're going to see very, very extensive repression. I think the military will be purged once and for all. I think the courts will be purged. And I think there's going to be a real authoritarian crackdown. This is the moment. If the coup has failed, as I said several times earlier, I think it was a last-ditch effort, and it's failed. If it has failed, then I think there's no checks and balances left against Erdogan really turning Turkey in a very Islamicist direction and a very authoritarian direction under his presidency.
We're learning also that air traffic out of Europe is saying that they're expecting or hoping that the international departures at the Istanbul airport will be beginning soon again. So that also may be a sign that the coup is over. As I read about Erdogan and his takeover of once was a thriving media, and as I look at this tonight, my guess is, or my thoughts like yours, Ambassador, is that if he has won, he is really going to crack down on these people who rose up against him.
I don't think there's any doubt about it. And as I say, not to repeat this, but it seemed to me such an insight into Erdogan's thinking when he said democracy's like a streetcar. You ride it to the stop you want, and then you get off. I think he's at his stop. I think he's going to get off if in fact, he has prevailed here.
I asked you about Western Europe and about Angela Merkel.